Good Tuesday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for October the 17th. Today we are reading together in First Chronicles chapter 17 and First Chronicles chapter 18, which is going to tell us the events of David being promised a wonderful, wonderful promise of a house for himself. This is speaking of the covenant that Yahweh is making with him to establish his kingdom, his family, his throne forever. And David's response to this. And then we're going to see in chapter 18 some of David's military exploits and many of the great victories that he was able to achieve because of one really important reason. And we're going to note that as we read through the text of First Chronicles 18. Let me get the text up on the screen for us. We'll read along together here in these two chapters. First Chronicles chapter 17 and First Chronicles chapter 18, beginning in verse number 1 of First Chronicles 17. First Chronicles chapter 17, verse number 1. When David had settled into his palace, he said to the prophet Nathan, "Look, I am living in a cedar house, while the ark of Yahweh's covenant is under tent curtains." So Nathan told David, "Do all that is on your mind, for God is with you." But that night the word of God came to Nathan. "Go to David, my servant, and say, 'This is what Yahweh says. You are not to build me a house to dwell in. From the time I brought Israel out of Egypt until today, I have not dwelt in a house. Instead, I have moved from one tent site to another, and from one tabernacle location to another. In all my journeys throughout all Israel, I have I ever spoken a word to even one of the judges of Israel, whom I commanded to shepherd my people, asking, 'Why haven't you built me a house of cedar?' So now, this is what you are to say to my servant David. This is what Yahweh of armies says. I took you from the pasture, from tending the flock, to be ruler over my people Israel. I have been with you wherever you have gone, and I have destroyed all your enemies before you. I will make a name for you like that of the greatest on the earth. I will designate a place for my people Israel and plant them, so that they may live there and not be disturbed again. Evildoers will not continue to oppress them as they have done ever since the day I ordered judges to be over my people Israel. I will also subdue all your enemies. Furthermore, I declare to you that Yahweh himself will build a house for you. When your time comes to be with your ancestors, I will raise up after you your descendant, who is one of your own sons, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for me, and I will establish his throne forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son. I will not remove my faithful love from him as I removed it from the one who was before you. I will appoint him over my house and my kingdom forever, and his throne will be established forever." Nathan reported all these words and this entire vision to David. Then King David went in and sat in Yahweh's presence and said, "Who am I, Yahweh God? And what is my house that you have brought me this far? This was a little thing to you, God, for you have spoken about your servant's house in the distant future. You regard me as a man of distinction, Yahweh God. What more can David say to you for honoring your servants? You know your servants. Yahweh, you have done this whole great thing, making known all these great promises for the sake of your servants and according to your will. Yahweh, there is no one like you, and there is no God besides you, as all we have heard confirms. And who is like your people Israel? God, you came to one nation on earth to redeem a people for yourself, to make a name for yourself through great and awesome works by driving out the nations before your people. You redeemed from Egypt. You made your people Israel your own people forever, and you, Yahweh, have become their God. Now, Yahweh, let the word that you have spoken concerning your servant and his house be confirmed forever, and do as you have promised. Let your name be confirmed and magnified forever in the saying, Yahweh of armies, the God of Israel, is God over Israel. May the house of your servant David be established before you, since you, God, have revealed to your servant that you will build him a house. Your servant has found courage to pray in your presence. Yahweh, you indeed are God, and you have promised this good thing to your servants. So now you have been pleased to bless your servant's house, that it may continue before you forever. For you, Yahweh, have blessed it, and it is blessed forever. After this, chapter 18, David defeated the Philistines, subdued them, and took Gath and its surrounding villages from Philistine control. He also defeated the Moabites, and they became David's subjects and brought tribute. David also defeated King Hadadezer of Zobah at Hamath, when he went to establish his control at the Euphrates River. David captured 1,000 chariots, 7,000 horsemen, and 20,000 foot soldiers with him, hamstrung all the horses, and kept 100 chariots. When the Arameans of Damascus came to assist King Hadadezer of Zobah, David struck down 22,000 Aramean men. Then he placed garrisons in Aram of Damascus, and the Arameans became David's subjects and brought tributes. Yahweh made David victorious wherever he went. David took the gold shields himself by Hadadezer's officers and brought them to Jerusalem from Tibhath and Kun, Hadadezer's cities. David also took huge quantities of bronze, from which Solomon made the bronze basin, the pillars, and the bronze articles. Then King Tou of Hamath heard that David had defeated, or when King Tou of Hamath heard that David had defeated the entire army of King Hadadezer of Zobah, he sent his son Hadoram to King David to greet him and to congratulate him, because David had fought against King Hadadezer and defeated him, for Tou and Hadadezer had fought many wars. Hadoram brought all kinds of gold, silver, and bronze items. King David also dedicated these to Yahweh, along with the silver and gold he had carried off from all the nations, from Edom, Moab, the Ammonites, the Philistines, and the Amalekites. Abishai, son of Zeruiah, struck down 18,000 Edomites in the Salt Valley. He put garrisons in Edom, and all the Edomites were subject to David. Yahweh made David victorious wherever he went. So David reigned over all Israel, administering justice and righteousness for all his people. Joab, son of Zeruiah, was over the army. Jehoshaphat, son of Ahihud, was court historian. Zadok, son of Ahitub, and Ahimelech, son of Abiathar, were priests. Shavsha was court secretary. Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, was over the Kerethites and Pelethites. And David's sons were the chief officials at the king's side. That is 1 Chronicles, chapters 17 and 18. Remember, in the previous couple of chapters, we traced, actually, I guess going back 3 or 4 chapters, we traced David's desire to bring Yahweh's covenant, or bring Yahweh's Ark of the Covenant into the presence of Israel to give it a proper place for it to dwell. And he tried to do it the first time. That didn't work out very well because he didn't do it according to the will of Yahweh, putting it on the cart. Uzzah ends up dying because he touched it whenever the animal pulling the cart stumbled. So David was upset. Then after David collected himself and considered Yahweh's will, he realized, okay, well, we need to allow the Levites to carry it where it needs to go. So they end up bringing it to Gibeon. He puts it in the tabernacle there. So and establishes worship surrounding it. Now David is feeling pretty good. He's in a good place. He has firm control over the kingdom. He has reestablished proper worship before Yahweh with the people. And he's sitting here in his palace, and he thinks about what's going on. He's meditating upon all the good things that are taking place. And, you know, as a good leader would do, he's always thinking about what is the next thing that can be done to improve the situation. He's speaking with Nathan. He says, you know, Nathan, it's not right for me to have a place for myself and Yahweh not have a place for himself. It's not good that his presence should just be in this tent. So Nathan says, fine, you know, do whatever your heart desires to do. And you got to think, at this point, David receives this from Nathan. He has confidence in Nathan's information that he's given him. He has confidence that as Nathan speaks, he speaks as God would speak. So you got to think, maybe even that night, David begins in his mind just thinking through all the incredible plans that he might have for God's own special house that would end up being the temple as we know it. And, you know, think about all the great decorations that would be in it, the ornate details of the design, and all this is going through his head. And at that same night, it tells us that Yahweh actually comes to Nathan and says, Nathan, you put the cart before the horse a little bit. No pun intended, considering what happened with Uzzah. But you got a little ahead of yourself, because David's not going to be the one to build a house for me. In fact, that's not something that I have indicated at all that I want. And that's an important lesson for us, isn't it? That we need to be very concerned with what God actually indicates that he wants, and not think that we are so wise to know what God actually wants. Especially when it comes to worship and things of that nature, we need to know what God actually wants and do those things, and not start making things up on our own. So he tells him, you know, this is not what David's going to do, but here is what is going to happen. I'm actually going to build a house for David. and I'm going to build him an enduring house, an enduring kingdom, an enduring throne. I will establish his name forever upon the earth, and he will be this enduring presence before me and before my people Israel. So it's not going to be him that builds the house, but it's going to be a son, and these sons going forth are going to be before me. My faithful love, my hesed, is not going to be taken away from them. I will appoint him over my house and my kingdom forever, and his throne will be established forever. So yes, this one thing that David would have been excited for is taken away from him, but he is given an incredible promise of an enduring name and an enduring lineage and throne and so on. So you just think about this, surely David would have been pretty bummed out by this, right? I know I would be bummed out, thinking that this really cool plan is in the future and you're getting to work this thing out, but that's taken away from him. But in its place, God gives him incredible promises that would give him assurance for the future. So what's David's response? Is David going to pout because what he thought was going to happen was not going to happen? Well, no, not at all. Instead, what we see is David dealing with this disappointment very well, and he does so by praising God and not focusing on what he could not do, but instead being grateful for what God was going to do. So David's not the one who's going to be doing anything, but in fact, God is making a promise that he is going to do something. And David then turns around and just praises God for the fact that he would be so considerate of David, his servant, because David expresses great humility in saying, I'm really nothing. And yet here you are. I was wanting to bless you, God. I was wanting to honor you, Lord. I was wanting to build something for you. But instead, here you are honoring and blessing and building something for me. What an incredible and great and awesome God you are, and that you do this not just for me, but that you do this for your entire people Israel, that you are so gracious and good to us as a whole. So he goes on from there, basically I guess affirming the promises that God has made. Let the word that you have spoken concerning your servant and his house be confirmed forever, and do as you have promised. He hears what God has said, and he acknowledges that he hears these things, and then he really expresses his confidence in the fact that God will do these things. May the house of your servant David be established forever, since you, my God, have revealed it to your servant that you will build him a house. Your servant has found courage to pray in your presence. I have found courage to be able to recognize and affirm these great promises, and I have great confidence that you are going to fulfill them. Please, or you have been pleased to bless your servant's house, that it may continue before you forever. For you, Yahweh, have blessed it, and it is blessed forever. If you said it, then I believe it. If you've promised it, then I have great confidence that it is surely going to come to pass. What a beautiful chapter 17 of First Chronicles is. Seeing here David potentially being very disappointed, but instead recognizing just how blessed and fortunate he is to be God's great servant, and for God to use him as the starting off point for an enduring lineage. Chapter 18 seems to be connected with this, because it does state that after this, so after God has made great promises to David, after David acknowledges his belief in God and his faithfulness in God, we see that David is incredibly blessed. He defeats the Philistines. He defeats the Moabites. He defeats King Hadadezer of Zobah. He has great success over them, so much success, in fact, that there are other nations who take pleasure in his victory over Hadadezer, specifically King Tou of Hamath, and he blesses David for his victory that he has achieved, and actually sends bronze. And this bronze, or let me see here, actually the bronze is from Hadadezer's cities. That bronze actually ends up being used by Solomon in the construction of things concerning the temple. And then it is King Tou and his son Hadoram that ends up bringing gold and silver and bronze items to David, which he again he dedicates these things to Yahweh, along with all of the other spoils of war that he had achieved over the fights that he had had. But what made all this possible? Again, in promising that Yahweh would establish his line, it would make sense that Yahweh would continue to bless him moving forward. That's what we see in verse number 7, that Yahweh made David victorious wherever he went. Same thing is repeated in verse 13, that Yahweh made David victorious wherever he went. It only makes sense that God would bless David in a very universal way, considering the enormous nature of the previous promises that he has made to him. But notice that it is something that David isn't just given these promises and then he kind of sits back on his laurels and is not concerned with things of God. No, he continues to be concerned with God. He continues to, when God blesses him with victory, David then turns around and blesses God and his people and his temple or tabernacle service with these things, that he dedicates them to Yahweh. It's a continual cyclical thing whenever it came to God blessing David, and then David turned around and blessing God in some way. God helps David. David turns around and praises God. God blesses David. David turns around and thanks God. It's just this continual back and forth between these two, showing the faithfulness that each have to each other, that each of these, that David has towards God and God has towards David, this faithful love, this covenant loyalty. All of this faithfulness is just overflowing from side to side. And so long as that continues, we know it's going to continue from Yahweh's side, but so long as it is maintained from David's side, we know that the good things are going to happen. Now, of course, unfortunately, we're going to see different points in David's life, or we have seen at different points in David's life that, that isn't always the case, because David wasn't always perfectly faithful in every. David wasn't perfectly faithful in every way to God, unfortunately. And when that happened, things did not exactly go very well. There was difficulties in David's life and problems. But here's the consistent pattern. So long as David was faithful to Yahweh, good things happen. Really, same thing is true for us. I'm not. This is not any sort of health and wealth gospel. I'm talking about here. It's not that whenever we are faithful to God that we're going to be blessed with incredible wealth or unblemished health or whatever. No, bad things happen. We live in a broken world, but there are certain things that do come with faithfulness: peace, joy, the ability to overcome what we might lack in this world because our confidence is in Yahweh. Those things absolutely do come with faithfulness, peace, and joy, because we can face whatever difficulties we are going to endure in this life, because we know that our confidence is not in something that is changing in this life, but it is something that is unchanging. And what is unchanging is God and his faithfulness and his goodness to his people. So yes, whenever we are faithful, we will experience good things. Maybe not good things according to worldly standards, but certainly good things according to the heavenly standards that God has laid out for us. If you have any questions or comments about this text here in 1 Chronicles 17 or 18, please feel free to leave that in the comment section below. And I appreciate you taking some time to reading along with me on this Tuesday. I hope that you do have a great rest of your Tuesday. And please make plans to join in with me tomorrow as we read together in First Chronicles. We'll be in chapters 19 and 20 tomorrow. Hope that you'll take time to read along with me then. Take care and God bless.